Namaskar. In this episode of Dil Se, we'll talk about India's foreign policy. Now, I've always felt that unless a country has economic clout, it will be hostage to pressures from other countries. And we're going to examine whether India has that clout and are we at all hostage in our foreign policy to decision-making that is done abroad. And I give you a small example which worries me. We have what is called the Shanti Bill, which deals with nuclear energy. And that Shanti Bill was introduced in the Lok Sabha on December 17th. And it was passed in the Rajya Sabha on December the 18th. And then on December the 19th, we had Trump passing a Nuclear Authorization Act. That is on the very next day, in terms of which he decided that he'll be dealing, and there are provisions in the Act in relation to India. Now, it's surprising that Lok Sabha passes it on 17 December, Rajya Sabha passes it on 18 December, and we have an act, of US Act, which deals with the nuclear energy, nuclear collaboration with India. And for the first time, private players have been allowed. Does that suggest that, one, there was a deal and Trump wanted India to open up the nuclear sector so that he could ensure that there is private participation and that the liability of private players, that is the suppliers of nuclear equipment and materials, is also removed, which was part of the earlier law. And so the earlier laws were repealed, that is the 2002 Act was repealed, and also the Liability Act was repealed, which was passed in India by Parliament. This worries me, and this is just one aspect of what's happening. And the other day, Trump again made a statement that if India continues to buy oil from the Russians, maybe I will increase the levies, the tariffs that have been imposed by him. This worries me a lot. In the meantime, we're highly dependent on the Chinese for our economy. In fact, our trade deficit will go up to $110 billion this time. This also is extremely worrisome. I remember way back when Mrs. Gandhi was in power and the nuclear test took place on 18th of May 1974, I think. And it was called the Smiling Buddha, if I remember correctly. And then, of course, in 1998, Vajpayee ji also had the nuclear test. He called it Shakti. And then, of course, Dr. Manmohan Singh, our Prime Minister, did a great job in not having been part of the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty. Yet, we were inducted. And we had a civil nuclear agreement in 2005, and then we had, in 2008, the consequential agreement, the Safeguards Agreement. We tried to get a nuclear bill passed later, and the BJP opposed the liability clause, so we increased the liability to a maximum of 1,500 crores, that is. And then now, that means there has been a hiatus in all this for so many years, and suddenly 17th, 18th, and 19th of December worries me a great deal. Also, I think global politics has changed over the years, radically, I think ever since Trump came to power. And the old order after the Second World War seems to have been dismantled. I don't know what the new order is going to bring for us. And apart from that, the recent, what Trump has done with Venezuela is also a matter of great worry for the global community. So we're going to discuss all these things with three extraordinary people with me who are experts on the subject. I'm just a novice. But be that as it may, Shyam, thank you very much. You've been our Foreign Secretary, the Chairman of the NSAB, joined the Foreign Service in 1970, Ambassador to Myanmar, Indonesia, so you know a lot about the neighborhood. And you were 1991-92 JS in the PMO, 2004 to 2006 you were Foreign Secretary. And you were actually a special envoy for Indo-US nuclear issues, so you will know a lot about this subject. Also the chief negotiator in climate change, Sherpa for the G8 and the G5, Glen Eagles, Padma Bhushan, whatnot. And so thank you very much for being here. Suhasini, thank you for being here. You've been in this business for what? How many years? Decades. and you've worked outside of the country. You've been with CNN International, you've been with CNN India for 1995 to 2005, reporting on India, Pak, Nepal, and you're also been awarded for what you did in the tsunami in 2005, the Columbia DuPont Award. 2005 to 2014, you were in CNN IBN, and you were doing this program called Prime. You were the prime anchor in Worldview, which we used to watch eagerly. 3 decades of reporting, being part of the conflict zone. You also injured yourself, unfortunately, in a 2002 bomb blast. You were the diplomatic editor, 2014, of The Hindu. And so you are aware of all these issues that we're going to discuss. Udayji, thank you very much for being here. Expert in strategic affairs.
Thank you, sir.
Right. Joined Sainik School, then went to NDA in 1966. And you've been in service for 37 years. And you've held various operational and strategic roles, and you've earned the Vishist Seva Medal for distinguished service. And post-retirement, you were into all kinds of things. You've been the head of the IDSA, and you've been in IDSA for several years, I believe. And 2005, you were appointed as Member Secretary to the Government of India's Task Force on Global Strategic Development. So we're going to understand strategy. And you've written a lot of papers. So thank you very much. Shyam, am I right in saying that, look, we're hostage to foreign policy of other countries? Not completely. Not completely.
No, I don't think that we are hostage to the foreign policy of another country. That can only be by choice, not by compulsion.
Okay.
So I think I have said this before, and I will repeat this, that I consider, for example, President Trump to be a bully.
Okay.
And my sense is that
are we being bullied?
I think we have so far quietly still resisted.
Okay.
But who knows what is going to happen in the future, because he doesn't seem to be backing down. For example, with regard to the Indo-US trade deal, my understanding is that most of the terms and conditions have been agreed, perhaps were agreed twice over.
Right.
And yet, when this goes up to him, for whatever reason, he seems to say no.
Yes, exactly.
So I don't think there is any kind of rationality behind the decisions that are being taken. And therefore, if you are representing a state, if you are a state, then you cannot deal on the basis of irrational impulses of a leader on the other side. So the only way to deal with this is really to look after your own interests, to prevent being, pressurized. Unfortunately, many others have succumbed to that. And what has been the record? If you look at those who have succumbed, are they any better off? They are not. I mean, look at the European Union, for example.
Right.
Despite the fact that they have actually accepted a very asymmetrical kind of a trade deal, it is still the case that they are getting bullied, for example, on the digital trade.
Right.
So my sense is that so far, I think quietly we have managed to, still
You think we've stood our ground?
Stood our ground, and rightly so.
Okay.
Because I do not think that making further concessions is going to serve our interests. But are we in a difficult situation? We are in a very difficult situation. I believe that perhaps this may be one of those periods where we are perhaps more vulnerable than we have been perhaps in the past.
So 17th, 18th, 19th December doesn't worry you, those dates? That it just seems to me that, why would this happen?
So, as far as the nuclear issue is concerned,
yes. I'm talking about that.
I may have to just explain to you the background.
Yes.
This particular bill, the Shanti bill, has actually joined together, and perhaps that was not the right thing to do, 3 different things altogether.
Yes.
Okay. One is the liability issue. The second is with respect to the regulatory board.
Right.
And the third is bringing the private sector in.
Yes.
These are the 3 elements. These three should actually be very separate elements. Now, if you are looking purely at the liability issue, the reason, if you remember, we had this great controversy in 2008, 2009, was because it was linked to the Indo-US nuclear deal.
Yes.
When it had nothing to do with the Indo-US nuclear deal.
Right.
This whole liability convention, international liability convention, actually was under negotiation for several years in the aftermath of the Chernobyl disaster.
That's right.
So, it has a much longer history. It had actually nothing to do with the Indo-US nuclear deal.
Yes.
Now, the international convention asked you to do only two things. One was you need to identify a single source through which, should an accident occur, you would be able to immediately distribute assistance to those affected without waiting who was responsible, who was not responsible.
For that you need a fund,
because what you remember what happened with Chernobyl.
That's right.
Okay. Oh, we don't know who was actually responsible. Now, second thing was, not only should you determine who's the agent, secondly, you should determine to what extent his financial liability will be.
Correct.
Only these two things.
Right.
So it was not that the operator would be legally liable, but he would be financially liable up to a certain point. And if it was, say, $300 million, this was left to you.
Yes.
If it was $300 million, you take an insurance policy for $300 million. What is the premium you add to your tariff?
Right.
Simple. While if you have that model legislation, it entitled you to get money from the international fund which was set up under the International Liability Convention, if such an accident. That was the simple, straightforward, the role of this legislation.
Correct.
Now they got mixed up in various other things with regard to supplier.
No, because that 17B of the old act has now been repealed.
Yes, but you see, the thing is, the government is arguing today, as far as I know, is that as far as the supplier's liability is concerned, that's a commercial.
Contractually can be done. But which supplier, given the kind of clout they have, which supplier to
maybe that's a different issue.
No, but that is the
issue. The fact is that even in the past, the liability of the supplier was part and parcel of contractual obligations. In the case of, for example, Russia, you did not even have that.
Yes.
If you look at the Rosatom NPCIL agreements, there is actually no liability.
Right.
So I think we got mixed up in different kinds of things here. What is very important is, number one, you should make certain that you have a legislation which entitles you to access that international fund. That is one issue. Second is with regard to bringing the private sector in. Very important, but that needs very, very careful kind of drafting as to how you bring them in. It's not only Indian private sector, it's also foreign.
Right, absolutely.
Now, that I'm not sure that due diligence has been done.
Which country in the world, apart from the US, allows the foreign private sector to come in? I mean, I don't know of any, I may be wrong.
I'm not very certain whether there has been. The one case that I know of is the French building a nuclear power station in Finland, which of course went on for a very, very long time. But I'm not sure whether there has been. The Chinese, for example, were building one in the UK at Hinchley, which it was
controlled by the state. I mean, there's no private investment there. Even with France, the French law is completely controlled by the state.
The French law is, but the entity is a commercial entity.
Maybe so, but it functions under the
even
the
with the previous liability bill, the only entity in India was the public sector entity,
That's true.
the NPCI.
Correct, I agree.
I mean, you allowed private sector to come in as joint venture partner.
That is allowed under this.
Now it is allowed.
Correct.
No, for that particular reason, it is extremely important that should be very, very carefully drafted. That is second part. Third part, which is very important, perhaps even the most important thing, is the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board.
That's correct.
Now, in such a sensitive sector, you really need a very highly empowered and
independent
board,
From the
which
central
also
government.
has, very well-known experts.
That's correct.
Now, that is not very clear. You have given it a statutory authority, but what will be the composition? Who will determine? Because if it is to be independent, then it's very important that there must be a distance from the government, distance from the operator. So I would have thought that these are three things which should be actually looked at separately.
Thank you very much. So, Suhasini, what's your take on all this?
Well, I think to begin with, there's no question that we needed to change the law if we wanted to go ahead with particularly the US, but also other foreign suppliers. Because since 2010, since 2012, when the act was passed, under pressure from the BJP,
Yes.
that called it a sellout.
Correct.
Since then, no actual contracts were completed. In 2015, Obama came to India. Obama and Prime Minister Modi stood together, said nuclear deal is done. It was never done. The MOUs that were signed, and over time we saw some more being contemplated, never led to a contract. And the main issue was liability. So EDF in Jaitapur, whether it was the US, Westinghouse changed hands and all of that, and its plans in Vizag and in Andhra Pradesh, or whether it was even the new Russian reactors, nothing actually got done. No contract actually got done. So there was a problem. It had to be fixed. Secondly, India needs a huge base load in the next few decades of electricity. Nuclear is one place to get it, and with these new, what are called SMR reactors, that small modular reactors, it is necessary to have some kind of change in the law to bring all these in. My real question would be, firstly, the legislation itself. Has it actually clarified these issues? I think Dr. Tharoor in Parliament said instead of a nuclear bill, it is an unclear bill. But the truth is that by leaving it to a contract, you are leaving it quite unclear what the government expects every supplier or producer to do. Second is, why was the bill rushed through? Where was the need to bring a bill on such a sensitive matter, which is so,
no reference to a joint parliamentary committee or a standing committee.
It's not my expertise, but we have covered it for 20 years. Yes. Even so, it takes a good full day and a half to read what is in there. And for the government to bring it in the last few days of Parliament session and just push it through without going to committee seems to indicate they don't want to discuss some of the things in there.
You don't indicate that there's some pressure from outside, because 19th.
Yes, I think that
19th December.
But that was there even earlier. If you remember, the first announcement that the Nuclear Act was going to be changed came in the budget speech in February, just a week before Prime Minister Modi was going to Washington. And in that speech, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman first announced, we will be making changes. It had no financial implication at that time, but she made the announcement. So that when Prime Minister Modi went to Washington, it was in the joint statement that now that and Mr. Trump has on 2 occasions said, I'm very happy that India is changing its law. So there's no question that this was part of the discussions. Even if it was, I think there are 4 issues where I would say there is concern. One, on the liability, the fact that the supplier liability word has been removed completely. What is it being replaced by? The second...
They say contract. You can still have supplier liability through a contract.
But it doesn't say exactly... it doesn't say what is the oversight of that contract. Who's going to watch each of these contracts?
They say 2 private parties will negotiate.
Exactly. Is that going to be to the best of the public interest of India?
How will it be? The
third is the fact that they have arrogated for themselves the power to get land, the power to take over populations, that kind of thing is always
difficult. EIA study, nothing of the sort.
Difficult for the people involved, and there will be protests over that. The fourth is that Ambassador Saran spoke about Chernobyl. We of course have the terrible history of Union Carbide. But this bill came about before Fukushima. And when we look at Fukushima, this is the Japanese nuclear plant that had a leak. When we look at Fukushima, by 2016, they had already estimated that the cost of the cleanup was $200 billion. By 2023, a new survey came out that said by the time the cleanup is done in 40 years, it will be $447 billion. in that scenario, to look at saying that we are capping at $300 million makes no sense at all, because the numbers that are required are far larger. And I think the fourth problem I would have is to take away all civil right of recourse. You cannot go to a court, period. You can only go
There's
to
an appeal provision.
It's only for the specially set up commission.
Yes.
No jurisdiction for a common person who, could lose everything, health, family, land and all the rest, to actually go to court. So that's where I would say that I'm surprised that the government bringing such far-reaching changes. You've replaced 2 acts.
Yes.
After all, the 1962 as well as the 2010.
That's right.
When doing that, did not want a larger debate in Parliament.
Well, let me take you up on what you said, that, when our Prime Minister went to the US, this was already on the cards. Let me tell you what the National Defense Administration Act, NDDA of 2026 says. It has a special provision, page 1912, mandates a joint US-India consultative mechanism under the Strategic Security Dialogue to assess the 2008 Civil Nuclear Agreement and, quote, discuss opportunities for India to align domestic nuclear liability rules with international norms, close quote. The US welcomed the reform, signaled revived cooperation, while critics argue it socialized risks for taxpayers while easing entry for vendors. Now, it seems to me that we aligned ourselves with the US saying this is what we're going to do, and immediately thereafter, and this was already agreed upon, the US passed this law on the 19th of December. This is what is indicated, right? So we are tailor-making our nuclear energy policy prescription to what the Americans want, which is why I pose the question, are we being held hostage to this? Because if we didn't have this, the Americans wouldn't have had this.
Well, this particular, that India should align itself with international norms, this is not a new demand.
No, I know
the
that.
US.
I know
But now
that.
to
Yeah,
consult.
this has been,
Yeah.
But also
I agree
the
with you.
international norm is the International Nuclear Liability Convention.
Correct.
Which is not a US law.
You are right. You're right. You're
So what the US is saying, that this is now the international law, to which you have also, given your assent.
Yes.
You are now a part of that international liability convention.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So if you are, then asking that you should align yourself with this particular convention, I cannot.
No. We cannot criticize. I'm only saying.
No, I'm the link between the US and this. I mean, it's not that the US is demanding that you should do something that the US.
No, what I was saying was the provision for private players, the provision for removing 17B. These are all must have been discussed. I mean, I can't imagine.
No, that I agree. What I'm saying is, that is why I said that as far as that particular aspect is concerned, the participation of private players, the participation of foreign players, rather than getting mixed up in this omnibus kind of a legislation, should actually have been a separate kind of legislation.
That is correct.
That is my.
You're absolutely right. But the Americans are happy with that, which is why
They would be happy. Yeah,
this is the point. This is
of course.
The door has been opened.
Tell me, Uday.
But sir, to reel back to where you started, is Indian foreign policy hostage? You cited this particular example of 17th, 18th, 19th. The fact that the bill was rushed, Suhasini said that it was a hasty kind of act that they did. I think that's empirical. And 19th is also empirical. So my inference is that if you go back to the genesis, going back to Dr. Manmohan Singh, 2008, and subsequently when we had President Obama, his coming, and Mr. Modi going there, I know from track 2 discussions, which I had participated in, or at least I was, a note taker in some of them, the Americans were very keen that India should come on board with various clauses that they had wanted, including the fact that the private sector should be brought in, liability should be at a certain level, and make it easy. Let me put it that way in a simple kind of way to understand, that apart from all the technical aspects, that American private players should be allowed an entry. And I think the sequence of 17th, 18th, 19th has allowed that, has enabled that. Now, as an outsider, if you ask me to sort of dot the I's and cross the T's, I would say that there definitely was some consultation between Delhi and Washington. Of course. to enable this.
Yes.
And again, my reading, and I don't have a smoking gun, is that these were supposed to be part of the sweeteners for India as it was entering the larger tariff kind of issue.
Sure.
And to keep President Donald Trump in a, shall we say, affable frame of mind.
Quote unquote happy.
It's a low-hanging
Because
fruit.
as you were saying earlier, since he's assumed office, the world has turned topsy-trumpy. And how do we make the Trumpy part a little more affable? So that's the first observation. I think there is a link between 17, 18, 19 is my reading. But the larger issue of India's foreign policy, the constraints under which it is operating, I think they are now, fairly severe, fairly obvious. But I also think that we are guilty of scoring self-goals. And the most recent example which comes to mind of Indian foreign policy being held hostage is with Bangladesh over cricket. I personally, and this is my personal view, I know it's not part of Shanti, but it falls into the template of India's foreign policy now being not only constrained, but perhaps even being dictated by elements which are not necessarily within the framework of governance or the traditional kind of, shall we say, foreign policy formulation. So it frankly stumps me, to use a cricket term, as to why a Bangladeshi player should become the cause for India's foreign policy to take the kind of orientation that it has done. So this, to my mind, is again, I would say, disturbing, to borrow your word.
But let me just on figures. At the moment, nuclear energy contributes to 3% of our electricity
It's only
production.
8,000.
It's only
8.2.
8 point, yeah, exactly. 25 reactors across India. And by 2031-32, it will contribute about what? 6.6 to 8 gigawatts.
Even that is very ambitious.
I agree with you. And by 2047, 100 gigawatts. I mean, it's again selling a dream. I don't think it's going to
And
happen.
certainly not through SMRs.
Certainly not through
There's-
SMRs. But we are now talking about the use of thorium instead of plutonium.
Yeah, so I mean, this.
I
is
want
still,
your comment on that.
This is still, under experimentation. It is not a settled and already proven kind of technology. I think the Chinese have done a considerable amount of work on this. What, like for example, I think Dr. Kakotkar has said that you can think in terms of, for example, irradiating this pressurized water reactor, is it?
Yes.
Irradiating thorium in that reactor to produce something like a different kind of a fuel, which will then give you the kind of energy that you want. And the attractiveness of this is that you have large thorium reserves, but you have very little uranium.
Right. That's true.
But the problem is that this is still in the future.
Right.
And this kind of technology is actually good for the SMRs that you are thinking of, in a sense.
Right.
But if you have any hope of getting to the targets that you have set, whether it is for the 2030s and certainly for 2047, unless you have very large capacity reactors of something like 1700 megawatts or 1800 megawatts, there is no possibility of being able to reach those targets.
The last issue I want to touch on this is that take France, for example. On the waste management side, they have very, very strict rules how to deal with waste management. And they also levy a tax on nuclear waste producers. And their funds that they have collected, which is part of the balance sheets of the companies, is $25 to $30 billion. We have no such provision in India.
No, and I would again take it away from the economic aspect to the impact on the people. You spoke about the French companies that want to come to India. The truth is that next month, perhaps we will see whether this new Shanti bill is able to overcome all the objections, because President Macron is expected, as Minister Jaishankar is in Paris, and President Macron is expected in India. So we'll see whether they can go ahead on this MOU that was signed in 2008, 2009 for Jaitapur. And that is a large reactor. That is, in fact, India's largest, 9,600 megawatts in all. But I still would suggest that we are not thinking about what kind of impact this is going to have on people. If you are going through SMRs, smaller modular reactors, then you are going to have a proliferation of them. Each one of these nuclear reactors, and I'm not for a moment suggesting that nuclear power is bad. I'm just saying that for a country like India, with its population, each of these will require land. They will require land which has easy access to water, which in India is very, very precious. And it requires the ability to, if there is, God forbid, some kind of a leak, then the ability to insulate that from populations. We know for a fact that these are very tall orders in a country like ours. So we would have to go through these steps very carefully when we're looking to ramp up to 100 gigawatts, especially when we are looking at other kinds of renewable energy as well. And India does have other strengths.
But still the question that we don't have a provision for a nuclear waste
as well.
The US also has a nuclear waste fund.
Well, we had some kind of strategy, if you remember originally, that was we won't have a nuclear waste problem if our plants actually expand, because we will be reprocessing the spent fuel, creating plutonium, and that plutonium will become the fuel for the next set of reactors. So there was a certain kind of internally consistent plan.
But that's
at
missing.
the moment,
that's missing here.
I mean, there is no reference here as far
that's
as
missing here. That's why I raised the issue.
The question is, everything has been put on these contracts.
Exactly.
I mean, you know, it's mixed up too many things together, and then therefore kind of issues that she is raising about SMRs, because if the more they are distributed, the more careful you have to be about safety.
This is Kakotkar's dream. These SMRs.
I
doubt whether he would be, because I think he has also acknowledged that the kind of targets that you have, SMRs will not get you to that target.
Of course.
He's been fairly clear about.
Let me move on, Uday, and let's start another subject which we can talk about. The action of the US in Venezuela. You know, this is in the context of that the world is turned
topsy-turvy, as we said.
Topsy-turvy. And, you know, what is the message that is being sent by these big powers now?
You know, sir, I'm just thinking that what's the simplest way of putting the message across? I think the image that comes to mind is of President Donald Trump on a horse with, the cowboy cap and cowboy hat. Like the kahavat, sir, jiski lathi uski bhains. I think we are going back to, this question
of the 19th century.
The fact
it's
that
not pre-45 as some people say.
Yeah, of course.
It is much beyond that.
Yeah, whoever is the most powerful will act in a manner that they deem
what does that
appropriate.
portend for us? I mean, I'm just asking in that context.
Again, part of the turbulence that we are looking at, that earlier we said that there was the equivalent of the RBIO, the Rules-Based International Order. Now I think we can add a second line and say RIP, that there is no more a semblance. Earlier there was a semblance. I mean, the United States was acting with impunity many times. So were other large states, the former Soviet Union, for example. So there was a case where the big boys were transgressing. This time it is the impunity. It is in your face. You can pick up a president and his wife. It's almost like, real life and, real life in celluloid.
No, also what Israel is doing. What
all
Israel
over
has done. I mean, you can see all this happening all over the world, and nobody is standing up. And the Europeans, of course, have said that no, we should be careful, we should negotiate, we should that kind of stuff. Other than China, Russia, and Brazil, and South Africa, they have reacted very strongly.
Sir, in theory, we used to learn about Locke and Hobbes. I think now we are moving into the Hobbesian world.
I think the larger question for India is India has always been a beneficiary of the multilateral world order, of the rules-based international order, because we've been able to punch above our weight. And what we are seeing now is a kind of almost tribalistic return to this idea of the sphere of influences, that everyone can do what they like in their sphere, in which case is India part of somebody else's sphere? If we are relegated to, say, the Chinese sphere of influence, where does that lead us? So that's one real worry for us. I think the second is the idea that the economics of it all are just being thrown out of the window. India has suffered, we don't like to say it, but in the last 1 year, through these unilateral acts of Mr. Trump, India has suffered economically. What is Mr. Trump doing in Venezuela? He wants access to the oil, possibly the gold, the coal, the iron ore as well. What is he upset about with India when it comes to buying Russian oil? That India was able to make some money out of the discounts, but that the US has not.
And
so
they
now
were fueling the war and helping Russia.
Well,
This is what he was trying to say.
I would say that he's more upset about the profits not being booked to him than he is about the actual war.
So we are hostage then. We are agreeing to all this. I mean, when I started off by saying, what choices do we have? Because if he increases tariffs, look at the 20-30% of our exports are being, 40% are being affected by all this.
I think on one of your shows earlier, I'd said that very crudely put, we have three options. We can either give in, or we can put up, or we can hit back. Now, nobody suggests that hitting back is a good idea against a much larger power.
Of course not.
Nobody is suggesting that putting up also or giving in are great ideas.
Right.
I think the only answer is try and do what Indians do best, play for time. With this India-US free trade agreement, for example, if we are able to bear the costs for a little longer, we may actually see, as Mr. Trump goes towards his midterms, that he doesn't have quite the same amount of clout in his own country, that his own interest may turn elsewhere. If the war in Ukraine comes to some kind of a pause, for example, you may see that some of the surcharges on Russia are taken away. My own sense would be that no, as you're quite right, that we may not have those tools to fight back right now. But in the process of giving in, we are giving up much larger principles than we would have before. Even if you look at our response to Venezuela, for example, yes. 40 years ago, the US did something similar by taking the Panamanian president, Noriega, convicting him in the US as well. India was a much weaker country, right?
We stood up.
Foreign Minister I.K. Gujral in Parliament stood up and said, we deplore, we condemn this act.
Right.
The fact that our statement today does not name the US, does not speak of the international rule of law, does not condemn, just speaks about concern.
That's right.
Is counterintuitive. We're supposed to be a stronger country now, and yet our statements are much weaker.
You see, Venezuela oil at the moment in the 70s used to be 8% of the global output. Today it's only 1%. Do you think Trump is going to benefit by all this?
Even if he thinks he's going to benefit from it, this will not happen overnight.
Yes.
It'll be several years of very, very heavy investment.
And they have the largest reserves in the world, I believe.
Yes, but most of it is tar sands.
Yes.
So tar sands are not so easy to actually exploit. So it's a bit of an exaggeration how much there is in terms of reserves. But the fact is that if the kind of prospects that he's looking for actually begin to be realized, it will be several years. It will be several years after Mr. Trump, presumably, is no longer president. So I'm not very sure what the calculation here is. Secondly, at least from the initial reports that I see, none of the important US oil companies seem to be at all interested in putting in billions of dollars into Venezuela. So this looks to be not a particularly clever decision on his part. Secondly, if the idea was that by doing this, he will make certain that the succeeding government will do as he wants them to do, that doesn't seem to be happening.
No, that doesn't seem to be happening, yes.
Some people may argue that, this is the initial response, it will happen, but doesn't seem to be the case. And if you look at the American record of such interventions, none of them have actually turned out well.
Absolutely. I mean, look at Iraq, what they did in Iraq and what's happened there.
I have no reason to believe that this would be different. Now, with regard to Indian position, I certainly feel that, on issue like this, India should
speak up.
The point to be made here is that when you are looking at constraints, I think he made an important point about Bangladesh, because the reason why it seems a disconnect is because the External Affairs Minister went to the funeral of Khalida Zia. He went and met, the son. He handed over a letter from Prime Minister Modi. I presume that the letter must have said something pleasant and encouraging. Now, if you are engaged in that kind of diplomacy, which I support, how does this make sense?
But you maybe we're looking at it the wrong way. Maybe it's something to do with the West Bengal election.
Well, if
But even
this
then,
is,
I'm just indicating.
which I go back to what I had mentioned once before when we had an interview. I said domestic factors always influence foreign policy. But foreign policy should not become an instrument of domestic.
Exactly.
There is a distinction.
You're right.
If your interlocutor, I'm talking to you, but actually my audience is somewhere else.
Yes.
Then you have
That's the problem.
Even the basic cost-benefit analysis of this should tell us that there is a problem. After all, India was one of the first backers of the Bangladesh cricket team. We brought them into the test. We really pushed for it. India has benefited from these neighboring teams, even the Afghan team, for example, and them playing in the IPL and all the rest. What have we essentially done by this one act of what I can only call short-term bigotry, to say Bangladeshis cannot take part without actually giving any principle?
You have more anti-India feelings there.
And Bangladesh is saying that we don't want to play in India at all.
Third country.
So now Bangladesh has written to the ICC saying we will not play in India. We would like to play in Sri Lanka or another venue. The Bangladesh government or the interim government right now has already said we will ban all the airing of IPL. So the point is, where is the cost-benefit analysis and what is the principle? Is it that any country where minorities are attacked, and it's brutal what's happened in Bangladesh to the minorities, any country where that happens, we will not allow them to play in the IPL? Is that what we're saying? By that logic, if minorities are attacked inside India, what is our response on that? I mean, the fact that we are losing the power of our example for something which honestly was not required, especially if the external affairs
we are
minister...
losing the leadership of the South. We are, as I think personally, that we are pressurized by the US in terms of our economic policies. We within South Asia, we're not leaders anymore. SAARC has gone. The Chinese presence of the Chinese and the extent to which the Chinese economy is now integrated within the Indian economy, where very few choices. We can't stand up to them for the amount of land that they've occupied, Ladakh. So, if we are not economically strong, and that's what I started with, you have very little choices in our foreign policy. And
but
you said
we are not so weak economically. I mean,
we don't have the heft. We don't have the heft to dictate. Is that what I mean?
Why should you always think in terms of dictating? Why can't you think in terms of cooperating? Why can't you think in terms of
where are we cooperating?
No. So
we are not cooperating with our neighbors so far.
If you take South Asia, our whole policy with regard to South Asia has become bilateralism.
That's true.
We are not looking at South Asia in a regional perspective at all.
That's right.
She said multilateralism was one of our strong points. Right. Multilateralism has also been put aside because everything you say, I will deal with bilaterally.
Right.
Your strengths are precisely your ability to have that kind of a regional approach, to have that kind of...
But that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, so I think it is not that we are weak. It is that we are not leveraging what we have in the manner that we should.
Can we?
On this, can I add 2 points?
Yes, please.
One is that when you look at India's orientation and how it is dealing with both the region and the world, cricket is a good example, which is to say that it is enormous soft power.
Yes.
But we have not used it as astutely. And the honest truth is that India is being seen as a bully by the rest of the cricketing world because we now are sitting in a place where we earn the money. Indian cricket earns vast amounts of revenue.
That's true.
So you see any commentary, for instance, in England, which is another cricketing place, and they are very unhappy with India's quote-unquote bullying tactics. On Bangladesh, sir, allow me to say from the security perspective, why I use the term self-goal is, the last thing from the security strategic perspective you want is a Bangladesh that is a mirror image of Pakistan in terms of nurturing forces that are inimical to India in the long term. This one act, whatever little bit I've seen over the last 48 hours on Bangladesh social media, is very disturbing. And that's what I fear, that we may have done something that could give some incentive to those forces by using this as the stick to stoke those elements.
I understand
And
that.
That would
Just
be a
as you
point.
mentioned that cricket is part of the soft power that
Sir.
we have. What about culture? I mean, the kind of cultural affinity we have with our neighborhood.
Music,
We're not
I mean, I
using that.
must say this.
One of the
Ritwik Ghatak
greatest
centenary
assets
should
that you
been
have is that
celebrated
cultural
by
affinity
Yes,
process.
so much, and we're not
Didn't
using
happen.
that.
I think the government has tried with culture, but it's always with countries that it prefers to deal with. So Buddhism, for example, or the Ramayan Trail. But it hasn't looked at South Asia as a whole. For the South Asian culture that binds us all. And for that, you will need more visas, you will need more people-to-people ties. And unfortunately, those get snapped every time relations get snapped. There's also a kind of double standard almost, I mean, a kind of hierarchy of what we can do. For example, I'm just giving this as an example. The External Affairs Minister, S. Jaishankar, went to Pakistan last year. He went for the SCO. But we will not allow anybody to go for the SAARC summit, which is meant to happen in Pakistan. Dr. Jaishankar went to Bangladesh, and like Ambassador Saran, I completely agree with India making that gesture. And over there, he shook hands with the Pakistani leader who had come there. But the Indian cricket team is told that they can't shake hands, which is considered mandatory after any sporting event. Similarly with the exclusion of this cricketer now. So there's become a kind of acceptance that the government can do something at its level, but this people-to-people ties just are not given the same.
Sir, you're a music and cinema fan, so let me say this, that on Bangladesh, we lost a golden opportunity on the Ritwik Ghatak centenary.
Yes.
And the music of Ritwik Ghatak.
Yeah.
That is something that both sides share.
Of course.
We lost that opportunity.
Well, okay, I made these provocative statements to all of you to get a sense of what you think where India stands. And what emerges is that while we may not have economic heft, there are great possibilities if we start looking at regions and collaborate collectively with those regions, and that we should lie low in our foreign policy for times to change, and hopefully we'll get some benefit out of it. But the fact is that we don't have that much of economic heft to have that bargaining power.
Not bargaining power. I would still insist that we have greater economic capabilities today and more to offer actually than you had in the past.
Well, there's no doubt about it.
But the realization, for example, let's take South Asia. You know, the kind of issues that we are facing, challenges that we are facing, say climate change, what's happening with the melting of the glaciers. You cannot solve those problems by yourself unless you are able to collaborate together with other countries.
How do you collaborate when there's a standoff?
So, you
I
have
mean,
to
there's a
take,
standoff with
you know,
Pakistan,
as-
there's a standoff
when you
with China. How do
when
you
you
collaborate?
keep claiming that you are the largest country in the region, then your responsibility is that these should be led by you.
So, but that's the point I'm making, but we're not doing that.
Yeah, that's because, as I said, we are always looking at a bilateral way of dealing with this. Now, you may have had some successes. For example, I think we did a good job in responding to the crisis.
Even with Sri Lanka, we did a good job.
We did a good
Sri Lanka,
job
we did a
with the
good job.
Maldives,
Yes.
in terms
Yeah,
of, bringing it around.
Yes.
Why can't that attitude be actually regionalized?
And we
Not
continue to
just-
keep a relationship with Bhutan.
Yes,
Bhutan,
and
yes.
not just here in South Asia, but the rest of the world also. We should be
Yeah, but at
collaborating.
least start here.
Well, thank you very much. This has been a wonderful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.